Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is my favorite time of the week, 5 o'clock on a Tuesday. Could be a Tuesday, could be a Thursday, but it's a fabulous time because I get to hang out with you guys and we get to interview some of the most influential people on the street, as we call it. It's what we call Wall Street, the street. So it's the City of London. When you hear people talking about the street, that's what we mean. Anyway, we get some great folk from the street and then we interview them about how they've managed to climb the mountain that you are all about to climb. And we talk about Kilimanjaro, don't we? It's the idea that you wouldn't just show up to Kilimanjaro and your trainers, you'd prepare for it. And that's what you're doing now. We talk about 10,000 interns and we talk about 10,000 hours. 10,000 hours is the amount of time you need to put in if you are going to become the best in the world, the best in the business, the best at what you do. And this is a part of that. So this evening, I am joined by Jonathan Sorrell. And I'll tell you a little bit about John. He's currently president of Capstone Investment Advisors, an incredibly successful asset management firm. Before that, John was president at Man Group. So, John, you've reached the top of your profession. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening. Absolutely brilliant that you can spare the time. I know you're super busy. I know you're working, 16, 18-hour days. So thank you for joining us.
Pleasure. Nice to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's great. So we've got a whole bunch of people on the chat and on the Zoom. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your questions into the Q&A as John speaks. There's going to be a ton of wisdom drop this evening, and if you've got questions and you just want to delve into a little bit, John, you said this, what did you mean? Put them into the Q&A and we'll pick it out. And by the way, if your question is good enough, we might even pull you into the call. We might even spotlight you up. So if you're in your bathrobe, I know some of you guys are from time to time, maybe put on a shirt, you don't have to put on a tie, but just, make sure you're looking good because we might ask you to put your camera on. John, let's just talk a little bit about you and your journey. I mean, where did it all start? Where did it begin? You're at the very top of your career, but it wasn't always that way, right? You started out somewhere. Just give us a bit of background about how your journey began into asset management.
Sure. So I guess I ended up in asset management specifically, somewhat by accident, in the sense that I started off in a different area. So I was reading law at university, and after about 2 weeks, I probably realized I'd made a bit of a wrong turn. I wasn't really enjoying the content. There's nothing wrong with law. I just wasn't really enjoying it that much. But I kind of stuck with it because I originally did law, frankly, because I wasn't really sure what else to do. But then in my first year at university, I did an internship at Merrill Lynch in investment banking, which frankly, I got in a pretty corrupt way. It was through a family connection back when that was something you could do. So I recognize how extraordinarily lucky I was to have that opportunity, how absolutely critical it was to my development. But I went into the M&A department at Merrill Lynch in the summer of 1996, I think it was, actually swearing blind that investment banking was the last thing I wanted to do, because I actually had an elder brother who'd done it. And I used to see him kind of drifting back from work at 3 or 4 in the morning, and I thought it was an absolutely insane occupation and a ridiculous thing to do. But anyway, I gave it a go and worked with some terrific people over the summer at Merrill. Had no idea whatsoever what the hell I was doing. I mean, absolutely no idea what was going on. But did a summer there and just loved it. And what I really loved about it, I suppose, was one, the content just interests me. I told you how law wasn't really for me, but actually I just found the content of M&A really, really exciting. I found the notion of doing deals exciting. I found companies interesting. But really the thing that struck me was the sense of responsibility. You were just being loaded up with as much work as you could possibly handle, as much responsibility as you could handle. And that's what really appealed. So I got bitten by the bug, as it were, in investment banking, and very kindly got an offer to come back for another summer and a full-time offer after that. But Merrill Lynch at the time probably wasn't quite as established as it was today. It's a tremendous firm, but wasn't quite as established. So I applied for internships in my second summer at university. I think it was at Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley. Ended up choosing to go to Goldman Sachs, which again, I swore blind that I wouldn't go to, because my now 2 elder brothers were working at Goldman. And I sort of swore I would never work at the same place. But I realized I really liked Goldman and I wanted to work there. And then the pig-headed side of me thought, well, why should my brothers get to work there and me not? So I went there. This is the way choices in life can be made sometimes, not entirely in the best way. But again, just loved my summer at Goldman's, and I ended up in a group called Financial Institutions, more or less by accident. So I had one brother working in the UK team, one in the technology, media and telecoms team, TMT, and it was sort of the only other place for me to go to. And I worked there for the summer. Again, really like the people I work with, like the content. I really like financial services because you get to combine what is a pretty interesting and multifaceted business with a kind of financial overlay. So it was financially sophisticated as a field. Again, was bitten by the bug. And so, again, fortunately got a full-time offer at the end of that summer to go back to Goldman's after university. So started there in 1998 as an analyst, did a couple of years in London. Then I moved to New York for a year on what was called Mobility. And I worked in a group which did M&A for Goldman Sachs itself. So Goldman Sachs is a company acquiring other businesses. I was going to stay in New York actually and continue to work in that group because I was very happy there, but met the person who is now unfortunate enough to be my wife halfway through my year when I was back in London. So I thought it was a good bet and came back to London essentially to be with her. So that worked out pretty well. And did another 6 years in the financial institutions group within investment banking. And towards the end of that time, focused more and more on asset management. So within financial institutions, you've got the banks, you've got the insurance companies, you've got some specialty finance companies, and then you've got asset managers. And what I really liked about asset managers is no one seemed to care how old I was or how long I'd been doing this for. So I would go, one day I would be trudging through Lloyd's TSB's corporate development department as number 5 on the team, just carrying the presentations into the meeting and sort of sitting in the corner looking sheepish. And then the next day I would be in the office of a founder of a hedge fund or something. And best thing was no one had any interest in looking at a presentation, so I didn't have to do a presentation for those meetings. And I could do them on my own, and no one seemed to care that I was 26 or whatever I was, 27, and they just cared that I could answer their 5 questions and then frankly get out of their office so they could carry on with their day. And that was pretty interesting. And so anyway, as I was working away increasingly on the asset management sector, I got a couple of mandates, assignments to sell stakes in hedge fund management companies. And back then, this was 2005-6, hedge funds weren't really that big a deal. In fact, I remember in 1998, going back to my very first year at Goldman, someone in my class, in my analyst class, left to join a hedge fund called Lone Pine, one of the greatest hedge funds in the world. And we all said, Ishwar's leaving to go to a hedge fund. And everyone said to each other, what the hell's a hedge fund? And that was really, at a time where hedge funds weren't really that well known. So anyway, in 2006-ish, had a couple of assignments to sell stakes in hedge funds, and there weren't any buyers for a variety of reasons. And I thought, well, if there aren't any buyers, we might as well start a fund to buy stakes. So I did a presentation because most things at that stage of my life were in presentation form, but on a serious note, modeled out the idea. Because if you model out an idea, all the detail, all the things you need to think about comes out of those numbers. And took it around internally at Goldman's and sort of slowly got support for the idea of creating this vehicle, which we call Petershill, to buy stakes in hedge funds. And then in 2007, moved to the asset management division, GSAM, to run that fund. So I did that for a few years. And then the idea was to create this fund and sell it as a vehicle. And we had a deal lined up to sell the vehicle. And so I was looking for my next job. And there were a few things internally at Goldman's to do, which, I wasn't terrifically keen on for a variety of reasons. And then an opportunity came up to join Man. And so I potted along for those interviews. I guess I'd always had in the back of my mind the idea of going into management at some point, and this was a good opportunity for that. So I joined Man in 2011 as head of strategy, became CFO there in the middle of 2012. I think you guys heard a week or so ago from Luke Ellis, who's CEO at Man, and probably talked a little bit about the restructuring job that we had over the next few years there. So I did the CFO role for 4 years, I think maybe just under, and then became president, where I was responsible for sales and a couple of the investment businesses at Man, one in private markets, one in fund of hedge funds. And then at the end of 2019, left to join Capstone as president, which is, as Dawood said, is a hedge fund management company. We have about $9 billion of assets. We're actually headquartered in New York, but I'm based in London, where we have about 50 people out of the 180 in the company. And I help Paul Britton, who's the founder of Capstone, think about the growth of the business and try and think about where the company's going to be in 5+ years' time, and then manage to that point. So that's how I got here.
So, John, look, it sounds like the dream trip. You start as an intern, and then, halfway through the ride, you come up with this brilliant idea to buy stakes, and then you end up as president of Man and now president of Capstone. I mean, the whole thing just sounds like a dream. Has it always been completely smooth? Any bumps? When you started as an intern, was anything that, I don't know, something that share a couple of experiences where things didn't quite go according to plan?
Yeah, I mean, look, as I said, when I did my internship at Merrill, I had no idea what was going on. I mean, literally no clue. And I remember one Friday afternoon, an associate was patiently explaining something to me, and I just assumed at the end of this long monologue he was going to tell me to go off and print out 25 annual reports, which was basically sort of my function. Anyway, he got to the end and he went, okay, and I was like, okay, what? And he's like, so you can do the model then? And I was like, I have no clue what you just said. And I panicked, and I didn't know what the hell to do. The lesson from that was really, if you don't know what to do, just ask. And generally speaking, if you ask people for help in a considerate fashion, they'll tend to help you out. But I cannot describe how terrifying that moment was when this person asked me to do something and I didn't even understand the words he said, let alone know how to do it. And there are various experiences like that through your career, and the two things you can probably do in that situation. One is ask for help, because I think generally speaking you'll find people are pretty willing to help you. And two, you've got to work really hard to dig your way out of that. So when I started working, I'd done law at university, I'd done GCSE maths probably when I was 14, something like that. Couldn't add up, and the only way to get up the curve on the technical side of the job in investment banking was I'm afraid I had to work really hard to try and get back, get up to speed, and just about got to an acceptable level. But the year in New York was pretty critical for that. So I had a choice at the time of I think it was going to Sydney for a year, which would have been lovely, or go to New York to work in what I would describe as a relatively hardcore team doing M&A for Goldman Sachs itself. So it was a pretty intense experience, but I kind of chose that deliberately, ran towards the problem, if you like, to try and get up the curve from a technical perspective, and like I say, get to an acceptable point.
I love the fact that you're saying, look, you weren't a maths wizard particularly, and in fact, frankly, no. You've done GCSE maths, and then you did law, which doesn't have a lot of numbers in it. I mean, you got a number of the paragraphs, but that's about it. But then you talk about running towards the problem. That's a great mindset. I mean, can you just unpack that a little bit? Because people here are going to find themselves in that. They'll wake up, someone will give them something they don't quite understand, and they feel out of their depth. It's great to hear that you've been there.
Well, I suspect I suspect everyone has. There are certainly much brighter people than me that will have picked stuff up quicker. But look, if you're confronted with an obstacle, a problem at work, I mean, your only option is to run towards it, not to run away from it. I mean, you will never figure stuff out if that's the approach. And look, dumb questions don't get less dumb over time, so best to ask them as soon as possible. So yeah, I mean, that's really the only option is to run towards those problems. The other thing, I mean, when I ran the Petershill Fund, I think I made 10 investments or something like that, and a few of them went, I mean, spectacularly wrong. It was quite something to behold, just how wrong they went. And by the way, 2 of them went spectacularly wrong in the same week, as I remember it. That was not a good week in my career. But I think what you have to do then is, again, run towards the problem. So you've got to be very self-critical about what it is that went wrong, examine your process, figure out what you need to do better next time, and then be ruthlessly transparent. So I would go and see our investors in the fund, people who committed $100, $200 million to this vehicle, always face to face. And so I traveled to see them and explain exactly what had gone wrong. And I think it's a good lesson that if you're totally transparent when things do go a bit pear-shaped, then people will be a lot more accepting. So I think if you're totally transparent, explain what went wrong, explain what you're going to do to fix it, actually your very strongest relationships will tend to come out of that. So some of those people I had those conversations with are amongst my very best relationships that I have
Yeah,
clients.
this is a massive point, ladies and gentlemen. It's not easy to do. In fact, everything in your head screams at you to run for the hills and not tell anyone when it goes wrong and try to fix it yourself. And it's invariably a mistake to do that. So what Jonathan's saying here is huge. And if you take nothing else away from this, and you will take up, but if you take nothing else away, this is a massive, massive point. When you're in trouble, just reach out, be transparent, like John says, and just tell, this is where I'm at. I've been in exactly that position. I worked at NatWest Capital Markets. I found myself a couple of times in real trouble. And I just went to a senior guy and I just said, a guy who I was called Tim Pettit. And I remember sitting him down and just saying, I've got this problem. It's a big problem. And he was just cool and calm and said, tell me what it is and we'll fix it. And I told him what it was and we fixed it. And this is a massive, massive point. I cannot tell you. Listen, I'm going to dip into the questions. Paul Allen asks an interesting question. Okay, did you feel the fear of being sacked? Did you think you were going to get sacked when you messed up the deals?
No, I can't say I felt I was going to get sacked. Maybe I was wrong. I never felt that. I think, look, people can. I don't think making a mistake is ever really a problem as long as you've tried. So making a mistake in the right way. I mean, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to make colossal errors. That's completely fine. Sometimes you'll do something so unbelievably stupid you can't actually fathom why you made the decision that you did, and that essentially no one's going to have too much of a problem with, as long as you're showing that you're learning from your mistakes, that you take them seriously, and that you've been trying hard. So, number one rule of doing an internship, I think, is expectations are so low in terms of what you're able to do. I mean, that's the beauty of it. It's like, why would anyone expect you to be able to do anything? As long as you're trying hard and you're a positive influence, what's not to like in terms of assessing an intern? So no, I don't think you get sacked. I mean, you get fired for things like gross negligence or gross misconduct. I don't think you need to worry about being fired. You just need to worry about learning from your mistakes and being pretty analytical about what went wrong and what you need to do in the future to try and avoid those. And look, I would say, I like to think that those two investments that went horribly wrong made me an awful lot better at doing deals and making investments in the future. And at Man Group, much to Luke's credit, we made a number of acquisitions which I was involved with that I think were quite carefully structured and generally speaking did pretty well in terms of returns.
Yeah. Listen, I just want to dig into something that you talked about, which was the setting up of the fund. You said you put a presentation together, took it to the powers that be and said, guys, I've got this idea, did the rounds, and then you got to set up a fund. But you and I both know that that's not easy to do. First, you've got to have the great idea. Then you've got to convince people that it's a good idea. And then you've got to execute the thing. That's some real skill there. It doesn't just happen. And it's not like you were the most senior guy in the firm by the sound of it. You just had a good idea. I mean, that's very encouraging. So can you talk a little bit about that skill set? Because how do you take what just seems like a good idea, but no one else has thought of it? So how can it be that great of an idea if nobody else has thought about it yet? I mean, can you talk a bit about how you came up with the idea, and then what was your process for then coming up with it and showing it to someone and saying, what do you think?
Yeah, so look, as I say, it came out of the fact that I unsuccessfully tried to sell some stakes in hedge fund management companies over time, and usually where there's a mismatch between supply and demand, there's money that you can make. So that was sort of the basic premise. And then, I mean, I do mean it. When I have an idea, I will always try and set it out in Excel. And what that does is help you think through all of the issues you need to think through. So what do you need to believe for this idea to work? Mm-hmm. And so, look, I put together as I recall, a model modeling out the idea, proving that the returns were based on reasonable assumptions, painted a bunch of different scenarios about how the fund might work out, set down what my investment thesis was. And then I went to someone I work for who, I'm very lucky. I work for a number of outstanding people at Goldman's. One of the people I worked with was called Michael Sherwood, who used to run Goldman in Europe. And I used to go and see hedge fund managers with him occasionally. And I took the idea to him. And I think my first meeting with him lasted all of 4 minutes. And he just thought the idea was terrible. Oh. And then I was talking to his chief of staff, Michelle Pinguera. And she said, oh, Woody always says that the first time. Just go back and see him again. Put some more time in the diary, go back and see him again. So, all right, fine. So I was feeling a bit sorry for myself. Anyway, I went back to see him, and this time he thought actually it was a reasonable idea. And then, it was an idea that cut across a number of different business lines at Goldman, so it wasn't entirely straightforward where it would sit. And it was quite a risky proposition as well. This was not a standard practice. It was quite a risky idea. And it sort of got a bit of traction. It was 3 steps forward, and then it was 4 steps back and 5 steps forward. And then actually, I was wandering around the office, and there was a guy from the New York office who was visiting London that day, who I'd done some work for in New York, called Chris Cole, another extraordinary person that I work with, who now has a very successful M&A business called Ardea. And Chris said, what's up? What are you working on? And I had the presentation in my hand, and I said, this is the idea. And Chris sat there and listened, and he could process stuff in seconds. And he liked the idea, and he picked up the phone to the CFO of Goldman's, and he said, there's an idea here, we should invest in it. And he picked up and made another couple of phone calls. And Chris is like a neutron bomb when he gets going. And he just started, getting that momentum going again. So, I don't think it's possible as I don't know, was I a 4th year VP or something at the time? It's very difficult to get traction without that sponsorship. But look, I think, with hindsight, what made it possible to get that traction, I think it was a decent idea that I thought through in a lot of detail. I mean, I had a list of questions in my mind, all the stuff people who were cynical about the idea would say, and I had a reasonable answer to all of those points. And then it's just sort of persistence, and you do need a bit of luck, right? I mean, it's whatever the saying is, success is where preparation meets opportunity, or hard work meets luck, or whatever. You need a slice of luck, but luck is kind of what happens, and you just need to prepare for when that's the case. I was lucky that I'd worked with Chris. I was lucky he was in London. I was lucky that he had a bit of time on his hands, because usually he'd be unbelievably busy, and and he took an interest in it. Perhaps if it hadn't been him, it might have been someone else, but that's how it happened effectively.
And look, I mean, I've watched you, Jonathan, and you're one of a handful of people in the industry who is exceptional at getting stuff done. I mean, you get stuff done. Can you talk a little bit about the art of execution? Because for me, this is one of the biggest skills that many people never master. I mean, you can have all the ideas in the world, but somehow you've got to bring them to fruition. How do you go about executing? What does your day look like that and how do you get stuff done?
So my grandma used to have a really good expression, which I think is probably Belgian. She was Belgian, and it's probably better in French. But the essence is, if you don't use your head, your feet will suffer. So the first thing is, I always try and have a plan for how I'm going to get something done, and you break it into pieces, and you just, as I like to say, put one foot in front of the other. My grandpa used to say, if you've got a lot of stuff to do, start at the beginning, end at the end. And it's quite a clarifying concept, right? You've got a lot of stuff to do, like start and then work through it and you'll finish. And so I do try and always have a plan for how I'm going to achieve something, and then just execute. In terms of my days, I mean, look, I used to work very, very long hours back in investment banking. I'm not sure it was that sensible, but that's what you used to have to do. Today I don't work anything like those hours, but my days are very, very intense, and they're very, very full. So I like to make sure that my time is always used as productively as possible. And it's a mix of different things that I might be doing of a day. It might be interviews, it might be management meetings, it might be seeing a client, whatever it is. But I guess I try to think that there's always a purpose, and try and be very, very organized. If you've got a relatively expansive role, you've got a lot of stuff going on. I'm quite a note taker. I mean, to my left here, I've got about 30 notebooks that I filled full of notes since we've been on lockdown. Every week I have an agenda that I go through with Paul, our founder, about all the stuff that's going on. And it's a good discipline, as I do, to sit down on a Monday morning and plan out the week. What have I done? What do I still need to do? What are the most important things that I need to do by the end of the week, by the end of the quarter? But it's having a plan to get to where you want to get to, working through it very, very methodically, being very, very organized, because you've got a lot of stuff to do. You've got to keep track of it all. But you do have to work with a certain intensity, or a drive, or call it what you will, which does not mean working 20 hours a day in all circumstances. It may mean that in some cases, but there is an intensity and a drive and a focus that you need to bring to your working day. You can't just put your feet up and have a chat and a coffee.
No, well, that's for sure. I'm reminded of Jeff Bezos's favorite saying. I think he might even have had it inked on his arm, which is gradatim ferociter, step by step, ferociously, which I think is how you approach things. But I mean, do you ever procrastinate? Are you prone to procrastination? Do you ever think, oh, I can't, I just cannot be bothered to do
Well,
that?
in my law degree that I mentioned, I was certainly guilty of a lot of procrastination. So I suspect if it's not something I really like doing, I'm probably a bit prone to that. But I'm fortunate I found an industry that I like and a job that I really value. So, it's not so much of an issue. But I think if you roll the clock back 25 years, when I was at school and university, that I would have been guilty of that, but not so much anymore.
Not so much.
I mean, look, one thing you do have to train yourself is, we talked about running towards problems. I mean, there's stuff that you're not particularly looking forward to doing. Yeah. You just got to get on with it. You just got to get on with it and do what you need to do.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think you do, I mean, I do this as well, and candidly, if you're ever going to make it, you need to learn to do this, is to have conversations that are hard. I mean, a lot of people, I really don't want to have that chat with, and just put it off, and just, well, they don't even put it off, they just never have the conversation. How do you deal with difficult conversations? I know, you and I have had conversations with other people, we've sat in on conversations. How do you deal with hard conversations?
Look, I try and be very straightforward. All strengths, when put in a certain context, can become a weakness. So there's no doubt I'm too straightforward sometimes. But I think in the long run, people will tend to appreciate a very straightforward, honest, open approach, even if that means delivering messages people, aren't particularly looking forward to receiving. But it has to all be with a wrapper around it, which is, anyone I work with, I take their career development extremely seriously. And the deal is, if they put in a lot of effort, I will back them to the hilt and try and do my best to make sure their careers progress in the right way. And that if if I move on and I haven't seen them in years and years, there's always a license to give me a call and ask for help if that happens. And it does happen, reasonably frequently. So, you can be demanding, you can have exacting standards, etc., but that needs to be backed up with making sure you're really backing the development of the people you work with, and making sure they're as successful as they possibly can be. I mean, that's essentially your job, is to make the people who work for you as successful as they possibly can be, or that they want to be.
So let's talk about 10,000 Black Interns, because you've brought that rigor, discipline, passion to this initiative in quite an extraordinary way. And I'd love to understand a little bit about your involvement in it, because here you are, a very successful guy, and in case no one has noticed, you're not a Black guy, and yet you are as passionate as any of the rest of us are about it. Where does that passion come from? And what do you say to people who ask the obvious question? They're genuinely intrigued and ask you, how did you come to be involved in this? Why do you care about this issue?
Frankly, up to 3 years ago, I hadn't given it a second thought. I mean, I had zero time reflecting on why it was there weren't more Black people in the workplaces or the places that I worked. And I say that not flippantly. I say that because I'd actually always been involved since I started working diversity initiatives, focused on gender, focused on ethnicity more broadly. But actually, it struck me that within all of that effort on the diversity front, the issue of the underrepresentation of Black people in the workplace had just been left behind on a relative basis. And like I say, I had not given it much thought until a few years ago. And two things happened a few years ago. One, Ian Livingstone, Lord Livingstone, who was the chairman at Man, on his first day, literally walked into my office and said, it was before Good Morning, said, "John, where are all the Black people?" And we realized there was one Black person on the entire floor of 356 people, as I recall, as the first thing. And then not long after that, I was asked to be the senior sponsor, as we called it, to the Black Network at Man, which is called Beam. And when you get a call like that, you can't really say no. That's one point. I was sort of faintly intrigued. Anyway, I went to the first meeting of the Black Network, and it was completely excruciating, unbelievably awkward to be a white person in that context, not to know whether you can even say the word Black. You're desperately trying not to tread on a landmine. And after about 5 minutes, I think I said something like, I really don't know what I'm meant to be saying here. I'm bound to say the wrong thing. Can we just have a deal, if I'm going to be involved with this, that we all get to say whatever's on our mind, and it's not held against you for the rest of your life because you happen to have said the wrong thing. And I think that's actually a really important point to have in your mind, is that, not people are not generally speaking very well versed in all of these issues. What became clear as I was involved in the Black Network at Man is that the issue of the underrepresentation of Black people was much more acute than I thought. So it was a very pressing issue. There were very, very, very few people who were Black in the industry, and it was very chronic. So in other words, it'd been going on forever, and it felt pretty chronic looking forward as well. I didn't see anything that was going to change things. And look, investment management is a talent business. We're meant to pride ourselves on having the very best people. Well, how the hell can you have the very best people if 12 out of 3,000 fund managers in the UK are Black? I mean, it's ludicrous. So it's not only societally completely unacceptable as a result, but it's commercially really dumb too if you're a people business and you're missing out on all of this talent. So look, we approached the network of Man like any other business issue. We came up with a vision, which was to have the first 100 Black people at Man. We had about 34 when we started. We had a strategy to do that based around recruitment and development and interaction with external stakeholders. And we set to work. And then in, it was June last year. So I think the murder of George Floyd was probably in May. In June, I was sitting at home looking at LinkedIn on a Sunday morning, read an article by Wal Collada, who'd spoken at one of our events at Man. Wal wrote a letter to his LPs, his clients, basically saying that there was a need for much more proactive action in terms of dealing with issues of underrepresentation of Black people, which perhaps in the past he had not necessarily been a proponent of. And it was written in a really thought-provoking way. And I just sat there and I think pretty much the idea just sort of popped into my head that, you can't address the underrepresentation of any group in an industry if there's no one to start with. And so this program, which has kind of, got a bit out of control in terms of what we're doing here versus the original conception of it, it's not meant to address all the issues, right? There are lots of, as Dawid always says, kinks in the hosepipe as people progress their careers, but you've got to have some people to progress in the first place. So we wanted to come up with this very, very simple idea, which was executable, to provide internships to Black students in investment teams specifically. We made it really simple for people, and then it was great because the industry really latched onto it, and here we all are.
Yeah, and John, I talk a lot about you as an ally. It's one of those words that's made its way into the lexicon, I guess, and increasingly people talk about allyship and ask, well, what is allyship? And then I sort of give an example. I give you as an example, someone who really didn't have to get involved. I mean, you could have carried on doing your thing of being president and carrying on grandly and merrily on your way, but you didn't. You stopped, and not only have you been heavily involved, you've been up until 2 o'clock in the morning sorting out CVs. I mean, you've seriously rolled your sleeves up and done the what you've needed to do. What message would you give to other people who are maybe not Black and who perhaps are standing on the sidelines and would normally get involved in helping to solve a problem, but with this one it just seems too difficult, and they just sort of say, I'm just not sure I've got anything to add. You did it, you made that step. I mean, is there a message that you could help people to just think that maybe there is a way in which they could get involved?
Well, it's probably a message to both sides. So to Black people who want to address this issue, I would ask for help, and I would have an idea of what you want people to do, because these are hugely knotty, complicated, awkward, difficult, wicked problems that have persisted for years. So I'm going to come out with all sorts of phrases that my family have given me over the years. Another one from my mom: if it was easy, everyone would have done it by now. This is not an easy problem to solve, clearly, because otherwise we wouldn't be talking about it. So you want to ask people for help, and you want to have a specific thing that you want them to help you with. And I think you'll find actually people are really quite willing to help, but you've got to do it in a way which is encouraging. And it is, I can tell you, over the last 3 or 4 years, there have been a number of occasions where I have felt like walking off the pitch, because frankly, you're not getting an awful lot other than aggravation in the other direction.
What does that look like? What's that look like, John? A little bit. I mean, what is aggravation? Give us an example of this.
I don't know. It can be skepticism of your motives. It can be taking something that you've said and deliberately misconstruing it. It can be this is an idea that not everyone likes, by the way. So it can be people who you know and like, disapproving, but it's fine if people disagree, right? It's life. It's not a problem. But there are ways of disagreeing. So so that's that's one thing I would say to Black students and Black employees in particular. And then, for people who might like to help, I think, it goes the other way, ask, right? So you don't know what to do, that's fine, but you'd like to help. So ask what you can do. There are simple things you can do. So there's a very high talk to action ratio when it comes to diversity initiatives, because people want to solve the whole thing, right? And trying to solve the whole thing, of course, is very admirable. But you just got to try and find something that you can do to improve the situation incrementally. So I'm sure you've talked about incremental gains in these seminars. Find something you can do incrementally. So for example, really easy one, mentor someone. So if you find a Black person who's starting their career, mentor them, and do it with do it in a special way. I think Dawid talks about people taking an irrational interest in people's development. Take an irrational interest in someone starting their career, and don't just mentor them, sponsor them. So Adobe Adibe, who helped a lot with setting up this program over time, always said, mentorship without sponsorship doesn't really help. So that's a really obvious, tangible step that someone can take to be an ally. Is don't try and fix everything. Just find someone who's starting out their career that you like and you respect and you admire, and help them on their way. That's probably a really good thing to do that's going to have an impact.
Yeah, and I mean, look, whilst you and I are both on the call, let's envision a little bit and think about what impact this program could have, because we're now talking not about 100 internships, we're talking about 10,000, which, as everybody knows, is 100 across 20 different sectors. Over 5 years, you're at 10,000. But as we know, these numbers are bigger than we ever thought. 100 turned into, I think, close to 400. There's a world in which 10,000 turns into a much bigger number. What do you think the world could look like 5 years from now in this space?
I don't sorry, I don't really know. I mean, what you hope is that this is something that we're not talking about, right? So in 5 to 10 years' time, there are the underrepresentation issue has been resolved. I doubt it'll be 5 to 10 years work. It'll be longer than that. But the idea is that we do ourselves out of a job when we don't talk about this. Now, the responsibility of everyone on this call is to, as Dawid says, lift as you climb. So the way to make this much more impactful, amplify the impact of this program, is by having everyone who participates in then help 5 other people, right? People at university, people from your school, friends, family members, whatever it is. But amplify the impact of this program with all the people who've been on it and benefited from training and their internships, helping other people get into the industry. And then hopefully in 5 years' time, you're not talking about an underrepresentation issue at lower levels, but you're talking about progression issues, because we said there are lots of kinks in the hose pipe. And then we can figure out perhaps over time how to help that issue. But let's start by getting people in at the ground floor.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things we did, of course, and I just want to talk about this very quickly, but when we had that call back in June, and you, me, Wal, Michael were just shooting the breeze and saying, well, what are we going to do? How do you get 100 asset management firms to start offering internships? I mean, this is something they've never done before, not to Black graduates, and no one's ever had mooted the conversation even. It was interesting because the 4 of us just picked up the phone, right? We just literally just picked up the phone and started hammering the phones and just making phone calls. You can only do that when you know people. And that's what we call social capital. And one of the things we've been looking at, and we've been talking to everyone who's watching, is about how do you create social capital? How do you make relationships as you come into our world, into this world, onto the street and into your internship? What are the basic rules? So John, just give us a sense of, how do you make relationships? How do you work out who to reach out to, and just some tips and tricks?
I think networking is as simple as just helping people. So I wouldn't overcomplicate it. It's not pinging people on LinkedIn. It's not, annoying them with emails. It's helping people. So wherever you meet people, try and help them out. right? So don't form a relationship with a specific goal in mind. You know, I want to get X out of that person. Just have faith in the fullness of time. You know, it'll be reciprocal, and frankly, it doesn't matter if you don't get anything out of it. I mean, you can help people all the time without needing to get anything out of it. So I think networking is as simple as helping people. And so as you begin your career, think how you can help colleagues, people in other groups, you know, senior people understand issues, whatever it is. But that to me is what networking is. And I think once you've helped someone, it doesn't matter, frankly, if years go by and you haven't spoken to one another. I think there'll always be some sort of bond there.
Yeah. And look, ladies and gentlemen, let me just tell you that this works, right? Because I think between John, Wal, me, Michael, I mean, there was literally no one we couldn't get to. I got to say that I think we're 1 degree of separation away from pretty much virtually everyone. And that we didn't just wake up with that. You're not born with it. You've just got to put in the hard yards, and you've got to help, and you've got to be a good person. I mean, John, one of the things you say is, you know, just be nice to the interns when they're coming in, when you're giving advice. Just, I mean, what, you know, how do you, just in terms of just basic principles to interns going in, and if you were just to give some advice as we come up to the close, what's a code of conduct? You know, how to carry yourself in such a way that 10, 20, 30 years from now, people look back and look at you and say, you know what? He's a good guy. She's good. You need to take their call. I like that person. I trust that person.
So I think number one is try your best, right? Because if you don't try your best and things don't work out, well, you can't really complain. So the first thing is try your best. Again, it doesn't mean working all night, but it might. You've just got to try your hardest. And then if it doesn't work out, at least you have no regrets because you did everything you could. So that's the first thing. Second thing, you got to be a positive influence, right? So you got to have positive energy about you. You've got to be someone people look forward to dealing with. Third, I think you want to be curious, right? So you want to ask questions. You got to do that in a considerate way. So you don't want to annoy people. That's a difficult balance to strike. But you want to be curious about what you're getting yourself into. You want to be curious about learning more about the field. And then you got to work smart. So this thing about being organized is critical. You know, as an intern, you're going to receive all this information. You're not going to know what the hell's going on. If you're not taking notes, it's going to make it 25 times worse.
Yeah.
So as you're getting briefed on the work that you need to do, you know, take notes, and then you collect yourself after the briefing, and you see what you need to do, and you say, well, those 3 things didn't make sense. And then when you ask for help, it's in a really focused way. So you're not saying, like I would have done to the guy who gave me work at Merrill Lynch in 1996, I didn't understand the bloody word you said, nor had I written anything down. At least you just say, I get these 5 things, but there are 3 things I need to clarify, boom, boom, boom. And it's an efficient use of their time. And they'll appreciate that, because they're going to remember what it's like to be at your level and not knowing what the hell's going on. So that's what I would say. Try your best, be positive, be very curious, but for God's sake, be organized when you hit your internship. Know what's going on, work smart. And then I think things should work out. You know, things should work out really nicely on your internship. As I say, the great thing is expectations are pretty low. You know, why would you expect an intern to be able to do that much anyway? So just try really hard and you should be fine.
Love it, love it, love it. I mean, this point about being curious, it's an old Yiddish saying, but I love it. And I love it, which is, to the worm in horseradish, the world is horseradish. If you're going to stay in your horseradish, the whole world is horseradish. And it's one of my favorites. You know, I love that. Don't be a worm in horseradish, people. You heard it from Jonathan. This stuff works, okay? You can go as far as you want to. Do your best. Do listen to what Jonathan's saying. And John, thanks so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure. I want to thank you as well for everything that you've done in 10,000. It's been incredible to be on the journey with you. I know, look, it just started in June. We're just in March. We've done so much together with Wal and Michael and with Stu and Faye and Esther. I mean, the team has just come together. It's insane how quickly the whole thing has coalesced. But it hasn't been by accident. It's really been by implementing all those things that you've talked about. So many thanks. Ladies and gentlemen, do not spam this guy with a load of nonsense. But if you want to talk to him and you've got a sensible question, John, I know, is very patient, and he'll always take the question and he'll always answer, and he'll always give you a sensible reply. Like he always does, no matter what time, he'll always do it. But no spamming. All right, John, many thanks. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Howard. And good luck, everyone, on your internship. Congratulations for making it this far.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks.